Welcome to the Reconnection Club podcast, the show that helps parents heal troubled relationships with their adult sons and daughters. I'm your host, psychotherapist Tina Gilbertson. Each week, I'll offer you compassion, clarity, and personal development tips designed to help you reconnect, not only with your child, but with yourself. Now let's get started. As the parent of an estranged adult child, have you ever asked yourself, why does everything I did for my child and the good times we had as a family not count? Or why is my child focused only on the negative? Well, many parents ask themselves those questions every day. I know because they ask me those questions too. And this episode is my attempt to offer at least a partial answer and a way to manage the troubling feelings of injustice that go along with the impression that your efforts counted for nothing. I always try to give you a takeaway that you can actually do something with, and we'll get there today, but this episode is going to start out a little bit abstract, so bear with me. There is a difference between a gift and a contract, and also between gratitude versus obligation. Now, let me try to explain the relevance of this to today's topic. When you were born or when you were adopted, someone became responsible for you. It was up to them to make sure you were fed and clothed and had someplace to live, that you went to school, that you learned manners and right from wrong, and so on. And these people, in most cases, were your parents. In addition to trying to meet your needs, your parents also had complete and total power over you legally. When you were small and vulnerable, unless there were unusual circumstances, they had free rein to manage your life. You didn't get to choose the person or people who bore this responsibility and this power, but when you became an adult, you might have come to feel, as I do, grateful to your parents for what they were able to give you. You may think of them as perhaps imperfect people with limitations who nevertheless loved you and tried their best to parent well. And so you're grateful to them for that. And maybe you have a desire to be more patient or generous with them than your estranged adult child is currently being with you. But the question is, do you and I owe our parents the kindness we show them or the time we spend with them? Is that why we're doing it? Well, that depends on your view of what it means to be a parent. Is parenting a gift given to children by their parents? Or is parenting more like a contract that requires certain obligations to be met on both sides? Let's think about the difference between gifts and contracts, which also entails the difference between gratitude and obligation. And by the way, if you're thinking, well, it's mostly a gift, but there's a little bit of obligation, if there's any obligation, it's a contract. It's not a gift. That's my view of it. When someone gives you a gift all wrapped with a bow and says, I got you a gift, here you go, you say, thank you. You don't say, what do I owe you for this? You may or may not feel grateful for a particular gift that someone decides to give you, but if it is a gift, you aren't obliged to repay it. If parenting is a gift, it's given freely for the experience and joy of giving it. But if parenting is in any way a contract, even a little bit, then everything you did for your child or children when they were young was a fulfillment of your part of a contract. And your children do owe you some form of payment if they accept the contract. And there's the tricky part. It takes just one person to give a gift, but it takes two to agree to a contract. This is why it's uncomfortable for many of us when we're driving and we're stopped at a stoplight and someone comes over and starts washing the windshield of our car. They're hoping to pull us into a contract with them where they perform a service and we pay them for that service. The problem is we don't get a chance to agree to that contract before they begin the service. And we recognize that for that reason, we're not actually obligated to pay them. The contract they're operating under was never agreed to. This puts drivers in a bind. If they don't pay, they may feel stingy or mean, but if they do pay, then they might feel taken for a ride. So it's understandable if this makes people uncomfortable, and sometimes they just drive away angry. Now, parenting is, let's say, a little more involved than washing a windshield, but the principle is exactly the same. Your child either didn't exist yet or was far too young to agree to pay for parenting services. You might have no trouble at all embracing the idea of parenting as a gift. A contract would mean you gave to your child exclusively for the promise of reward, and that your child is a bad apple who reneges on contracts. Not a pretty picture. I assume most people like to think of parenting more in a gift category. But even if you did give all of that energy and all of those sacrifices as a gift, you might still ask, why doesn't my child want to reciprocate? And that is a very good question. Reciprocation is part of most of our relationships. If you had a friend you were always taking to lunch and giving cards and gifts for birthdays and holidays, and that person never reciprocated, for many, if not most of us, that would violate our expectations of relationships. And although the giving is naturally and expectedly all one way from parents when children are young, once they grow up, adult children can and do become reciprocators in their relationships with their parents. But usually, at least 3 things have to be true first. Number 1, the parent has sufficiently met the child's developmental needs. 2, and this is often related, the child is emotionally and psychologically ready to engage in adult relationships. And 3, the relationship is not too troubled. If any of those conditions aren't in place, there may be work for you, your child, or both of you to do before reciprocation is easier. So, what do you do in the meantime with feelings of injustice? First, ask yourself, how much did my parents give to me, and how much did they get back from me? This question is important because if the answer is anything other than a wholehearted, they gave me way more than I could ever repay, then you might struggle a little bit more with a sense of injustice. It's good to know that, and it's good to consciously sit with those feelings and give them your compassionate attention so that they don't hijack your behavior. You don't want to compel your child to reciprocate right now because that will just be frustrating. And you don't want to cultivate resentment that will make it that much harder to reconcile. So choose to feel the emotions that come up around this topic without judging yourself or your child. If you need help with that, please check out my book about how to manage emotions. It's called Constructive Wallowing: How to Beat Bad Feelings by Letting Yourself Have Them. And I'll put a link to that in the show notes. Until next time, remember that you are a loving, lovable, and still growing human being. So please take good care of yourself. Bye for now. If you've enjoyed this episode of the Reconnection Club podcast, I invite you to check out reconnectionclub.com. The Reconnection Club is for parents at any stage of estrangement from their adult, child, or children. So whether you've just realized there's trouble between you, you've been living with estrangement for years, or you're newly reconciled but still walking on eggshells, the Reconnection Club is your essential resource for information, support, and continued personal growth. With our courses and workshops, expert interviews, monthly Q&A calls, and a friendly, active community, the Reconnection Club is a wonderful place to be for anyone suffering the pain of estrangement from an adult, child, or children. So check it out at reconnectionclub.com.